Alrighty, we've got the council president online, so we'll go ahead and start screaming. We do have a quorum. I'll go ahead and start the meeting. Clerk, will you please call roll? Welcome, council president. We can see you. Just so you know, you are like on all the big screens. Go ahead.
Bajan,
Here.
Clegg,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Sanchez, Thompson,
Here.
Woodings. 4 present, 2 absent.
Thank you. Before we get going, we actually have something to do this evening that's not on the agenda because we could not have anticipated that we'd be having this conversation and thanking these young lifeguards and leaders in our community. Last week at Ivy Wild Pool, there was an incident. A 4-year-old was found unresponsive after being in the water, and this team of lifeguards and managers from Ivy Wild Pool saved that child's life. And so we wanted to thank you officially. It's really wonderful to be able to see each of you here. And I have to say that when I heard, I could not believe that it was a 16-year-old, you're 16, 18, 18-year-old that, is one of our lifeguards, helped bring back a 4-year-old. And just thinking about my own time as a lifeguard, as a student, I'm so thankful I never had to do that. And the teamwork that each of you showed, the leadership that you showed, your ability to respond as you've been trained says so much about each of you. And you're such great examples for all of us and a reminder of how important it is that we look out for each other. We hire good people at the city of Boise. Our community helps and steps in when necessary, no matter what age. And we have each of you to thank for the fact that a toddler will be back in his or her parents' arms, if not already, but because of each of you. So thank you very, very much. We have a couple certificates to hand out, just in official commemoration of the work that's been done. And so I'm going to read names, but then I'll come down. I've got 4 to hand out. I know that there were some of these represent multiple people that are here today. First off, Max Poole, why don't you go ahead and stand up if you don't mind, so I'm going to really embarrass you, so we can say thank you and everybody can. Logan McDougall, thank you. Kylie Godfrey. And then we also had, as part of the team, Emily, is it Vaden or Vaden? I'm sorry, Vaden. Elizabeth Thompson. And Corey Van Order. And then we have 2 staff members also that we just wanted to thank, and that's Carrie Porritt and Paula Lawson. So I'm going to hand these out. Others might have something to say. And we'll do that, and then we'll get on with the rest of the business.
Madam Mayor, may I say a word while you're handing those out? Since I'm not there in person.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Since I'm not there in person and others are, I just want to also offer my thanks to really tremendous job. In my years at the city, we've never had an incident like this, but have trained for it the whole time. And it's great to know that the training was good enough to make sure that this young toddler was saved. So thank you all for taking your job so seriously.
Thank you, Council President.
report. She does all the training for our lifeguards.
Madam Mayor, just real quick before we keep moving down the agenda, I really appreciate you all being down here today. I know that when you step up in a moment of crisis, you don't do it expecting that you're going to be in a room getting an award or a certificate, and that's not the reason why you do it. I've been in some wild situations. I used to fight fire and a variety of other things. And I'm always really interested to see who are the people who jump in when other people don't, or who are able to keep their head cool, or who are able to really think about others in times of crisis. And it really is a huge deal. And I know that it takes a lot of time to process as well, because it's also really scary and traumatic. And I just want to thank you for, in that moment, making that decision. And it's really appreciated. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, in a former life before I sat around in shirts and did this, I was a firefighter and an EMT. And many, many times, by the time you get there, the subject or the victim is dead, and they're dead or unrecoverable because people don't know how to do what they need to do. They don't have the training, or because, like my colleague said, they're overwhelmed or they have other concerns. With a 4-year-old boy, you saved his life. That's going to be a future citizen of this community. That's a huge and wonderful thing. And the fact that you did it as efficiently, as effectively as I've told that you've done it, just speaks volumes to your character and to your just a wonderful asset that we have in the community because you live here. So on behalf of that child, on behalf of their parents, everybody else who would have been there in that scene that might have been very, very different, thank you. You did a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I'm so proud that you're part of our town.
Madam Mayor, briefly, I know there's no one more thankful than the parents and the child himself, which someday he'll come to recognize that you rescued him. But all of us also, from the bottom of our heart, sincerely thank you for stepping up and doing something so noble and courageous as this. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry I was a little bit late, but I was, as a parent and as somebody who often takes my children to Boise pools, it's just so heartening to know that we have lifeguards and others who are willing to step in at that critical moment, who know what to do. And, that could have been my kid. By all means, there have been several times when, they just get a little bit deeper than they can handle. And I'm sure that you have seen that over and over again. So very well done. We really owe you a debt of gratitude. I'm sure your parents are super proud, and we're proud of you too. Thank you.
Well, it was great to have you here today. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks, as I said before, for saving this kiddo's life, for doing all that you did. Truly, truly appreciate it. And I'm really glad that we were able to come all together today to see you in person, to thank you in person. So I hope that you know that there truly is a city's amounts worth of gratitude as we think of each of you, and will for a long, long time. Thank you. You guys are free to get out of here. If you want to get out of here, really appreciate the service that you provided to this family and to your city. Thank you. Well, thanks, everybody. We are going to move into our regularly scheduled business. First up, we have Travis, welcome, to review, the interim budget changes memo. Oh, I don't think the mic's on.
Is this better?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. So there's just two IBCs this time, and both of them are just transferring funds from the general fund into the capital fund. For police, it's just an accounting fix. Two pieces of equipment that should have been accounted for in the capital fund were bought with funds out of 101. So it's just moving the money from 101 to 402, from the general fund to the capital fund. And then the second one is Public Works, likewise moving money from the general fund to the capital fund. And I apologize, the memo doesn't specify, but the total dollar change is $665,000, and it is a one-time change. But it's just taking money that were identified in year-end funds, as well as a few programs that were identified in the fiscal 21 budget, and using that towards electrification of several city facilities, including a fire station, the Fort Boise Community Center, and also the fleet shop, and moving those funds from 101, again, from those activities into the capital fund, where they can be used to fund those repair projects. Are there any questions?
Doesn't look like it.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
with that, I would move that we approve the interim budget changes as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
Halliburton,
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have Steve Burgos to go over the water renewal bond. This will be on the council agenda tonight as an ordinance, and is a follow-on from the presentations and planning and direction that we've received from council in general. Steve will go into the kind of the specifics, but just to tee it up, we have the opportunity, we have a have to as a community, and that is to address our aging water treatment plant. And then to prepare and respond to the growth that we've seen and will see in our community by expanding that. And there are two ways that we can fund it. We can, by putting it on the ballot, we'll be asking the public if they would like to vote to keep sewer rates lower, or if they want to vote no and then have sewer rates higher from January onward. And this is important because, of course, we have to have the system to keep our water clean, but it prepares us to ensure that we have enough water, clean water, usable water in the future, both for our residents as well as for our businesses. So it combines clean water, climate action, economic development, and preparedness as our community grows, is the thinking and really the strategy behind what Steve will be talking about now. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Steve Burgos. I'm the Public Works Director. And I'm going to give you a summary today of what you'll be seeing this evening in the ordinance for the bond election. The information I'm going to provide today is just for information only. There's no vote required today at the work session. We'll be working our way through the 3 readings of ordinance over the next 3 council sessions. So just a kind of, before we get into the future investments, I wanted to share some good news. We have asked a lot of our community over the years through our water renewal rates to fund improvements at our facilities. It was brought to my attention from staff recently. We have a sampling and monitoring staff that go out and they take water quality samples, but they also look for indicator species along the river. And recently, within the last year or so, we've started finding freshwater mussels in the Boise River, something that we haven't been finding over the past several decades. We've had folks like the USGS go out and do surveys. They haven't found them. And it was in the last probably year and a half where staff started finding freshwater mussels. And the little guy you see here on the slide is specimen number 18. And what's special about specimen number 18 is it's downstream of both of our water renewal facilities. meaning that we're treating our water, the upgrades that we've been pursuing at our facilities, whether it's for phosphorus removal, whether it's for ammonia treatment, whether it's for BOD, et cetera. Those investments have been paying off. And that's witnessed by specimen number 18 here. That's a really good indicator of water quality, high water quality in the Boise River. So making good progress. We can still make more progress moving forward, but a good indicator that past community investments are paying off.
Madam Mayor? Steve, I would love to see specimen number 18 and also the rest of your presentation if more is coming up, but it's not on the screen here.
Oh. Let me.
Was there a picture of specimen number 18?
There is a picture of specimen number
I got that
18.
impression, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to get the.
I thought it was like
images.
proverbial special.
I'm gonna need some IT help. I was so excited about specimen number 18. We'll get it addressed here in a second. I apologize.
You know, we could probably Google it, but I bet you have more slides after this, so.
I do. That's not specimen number 18.
Hmm.
And can I share how disconcerting it is to see your face that large on screens as you're presenting?
Yeah.
It's like, oh. Well, let me keep moving forward in the interest of time, in the hopes that we'll be able to pull up this. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so as I was mentioning, the investments we've been making over the past several decades on behalf of the community are paying off. And there's the actual image of specimen number 18. He's just downstream of the Linder Bridge, which again is downstream of both the Lander Street and the West Boise facility. So again, a great indicator of good river health. Again, we can keep doing better. We got to stay on top of it. But again, a good story that I wanted to share.
So
with
I hate to beleaguer this specimen 18, but when you say he is in the river, did he get put back in the river?
We're still going to be researching how it all came about. We certainly we're finding freshwater mussels upstream of the facilities in recent, probably couple of years. But we hadn't found any downstream of the facilities, and now we're starting to find them downstream of the facilities. I can get more information for you, Mayor, on.
Oh, that's okay.
on these.
We don't
coming
want
up.
these in the river, do we?
We do. It's a good indication of a healthy river.
Even, okay, so it's okay that they're
Yeah, it's
below-
not an invasive species.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, not an invasive species. Yeah, this is a naturally occurring species that we want in the river. If you've ever been on the salmon river, you'll see clusters of these
Mhm.
up on the salmon,
Okay.
freshwater mussels.
Sorry, I was getting them confused with the bad mussels.
No, no worries. I should have been clear. So looking to the future, however, we know that there's future community investment that's needed. As the mayor mentioned, we are obliged to treat wastewater under the Clean Water Act. We have the discharge permits that we're required to meet. The system is comprised of nearly $3 billion in assets. You may have remembered that in the past, I had been sharing a number that was closer to $2 billion. That was a number from 2015. It's been hard to believe, 7 years since we had developed that number. And if you just take into account inflation and then the construction market and the assets that we've been adding since then, we're closer to $3 billion in assets. So moving forward, we do need investment. And so the primary driver of the investment is to proactively repair and replace an aging system. I have the dates there for the Lander Street facility. That was built in 1945. We are at the very beginning of replacing that facility. The West Boise facility, our other water renewal facility, was built in 1976. And then we have almost 1,000 miles of pipe underneath the city, under the city streets. And we have 29 lift stations, with the oldest pipe being installed in 1898. So our ability to continue to treat, to move water, to treat it is really predicated on maintaining a viable system that can operate as designed. So it's really important that we be proactive about replacing that aging infrastructure. The picture you see on the left, the two pictures you see on the left, is just a picture of a before and after. So that is the Joplin main line going into the West Boise water renewal facility. That's a 60-inch diameter pipe that was going into the facility. You can see the state of the pipe back in 2017 prior to replacement. Those lines hanging down are gaskets. That's not supposed to be that way. It's not to suggest that anybody did anything wrong. It's just these systems start to fail over time. We have a very good maintenance record, but they do need replaced over time. And so you can see in 2018, we completed the Joplin main replacement, and there's a new pipeline on the bottom. So these types of projects need to continue happening. We're at a point, an age in the system that we really have significant upgrades, replacement costs that are coming. Other funding drivers the mayor alluded to, we have community expectations. We've been hearing very clearly from our community and the outreach that they expect us to be pursuing things that will help address things like climate change. So water supply diversification, that's part of our recycled water program. We certainly have expectations to meet regulatory requirements, and we are a growing city. So we need to add capacity to the system to make sure that we can address growth, but also address economic development. We have companies that want to move here. We need to make sure that we have capacity to take their wastewater that they want to send to us. So why consider bond financing? Several reasons that we've been approaching mayor and council about pursuing bond financing. One, it takes advantage of historically low interest rates right now. The city of Nampa was able to secure a bond financing through the state revolving fund for 1.68% interest, which is extremely low. So we want to try to take advantage of those low interest rates. It provides access to new funding sources. If we pass the bond, we can make applications to things like the state revolving fund, to things like the WIFIA program through EPA. If we don't have approval for the bond, those funding sources, we cannot access those. As the mayor alluded to, it reduces our upfront rate increases and aligns costs better with those benefiting from the new infrastructure in the future. We talk about intergenerational equity, that the folks who are later in the time frame of the improvements ought to pay their fair share. If we just have all that cost up front, it doesn't align the cost as well as it could with future users. So the total bond amount, we are requesting permission from the voters to borrow over the next 10 years. So we're trying to fund the next 10 years of capital improvements. We're going to ask the voters for up to $570 million to be financed over 30 years. So just making sure we're clear on those number differences. The next 10 years, we have a capital plan that we want to fund through bond financing. And those bonds will be financed over 30 years. The major factors in developing the bond amount were related back to construction cost estimates from the utility plan. We talked to several construction firms in the valley to get a sense for how they see the construction market moving into the future. And they strongly recommended that we carry some escalation on construction costs moving forward, as we're seeing throughout the valley. And then just increased inflation. We wanted to make sure we're being conservative moving forward to account for potential increases in inflation. So all that is adding up to a request from voters to borrow up to $570 million. Now, we don't have to borrow that full amount. You all are very well aware of the infrastructure bill that's being discussed in Washington, D.C. If that would move forward and we could get grant money from the federal government through that infrastructure bill, that would be less money that we'd have to borrow moving forward. So we have that option is always going to be on the table. The proposed ballot language that you'll see in the ordinance is in the packet for this evening. And I'll just read you the proposed ballot language. To continue to protect the health of the Boise River, ensure reliable sewer services, encourage economic development, and to take climate action. In October 2020, Boise City Council approved essential improvements to Boise's water renewal system, including upgrading aging pipes and water treatment facilities, constructing an additional facility to keep up with customer demand, and launching a recycled water program. Improvements can be paid for with cash from higher upfront sewer rate increases or financed to keep upfront sewer rate increases low. Shall the city of Boise City, Idaho, be authorized to keep sewer customer rate increases low by issuing and selling one or more series of revenue bonds up to $570 million over the next 10 years. And so as we read that ballot language, what does that mean from a yes/no vote? So based on the ballot language, a yes vote would authorize bond funding up to $570 million. It would allow us to have access to that new funding sources, new funding options, and then results in lower upfront rate increases. A no vote indicates a preference for cash funding, rejects bond funding, not the projects. We still have to move forward with the improvements, and results in sharper upfront rate increases. And then just looking at the annual rate increases, a yes vote and a no vote, just looking at the FY22 through FY40. The FY22 numbers are estimates that we'll use for that fiscal year. Anything after FY22 truly are estimates. We'll be revisiting those on an annual basis, but just wanted to give you a sense for the difference between the cash and bond versus the cash only. So a yes vote and a no vote. And then just the bond election timeline very quickly. We have the 3 readings of bond ordinance 817, 824, and 831 over the next 3 council meetings. In September, we have the deadline to submit the ballot language to the county. And then we're still working with the county in October to establish when the absentee ballots will be mailed and early voting beginning. We're still working with the county to figure those out. And then election day is November 2nd. And throughout that, we'll be working on community education on what a yes vote means, what a no vote means, etc. And with that, I will stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor.
Council President, the council member Woodings was about to start a question, then you'll be next.
Thank you. Steve, I know that there are a lot of rules around what ballot language can say and not say. Can you give us just kind of a quick rundown of what those rules are as you developed what actually goes on the ballot?
Madam Mayor, council member, thank you for the question. So the rules are very specific, and I'm looking for our legal counsel, Mary Grant. Maybe she would be better to answer. She's helped us navigate all of this. They are very specific on what we can and cannot say. And so we try to be very specific to what the legislation, how it reads, and make sure that we're following that. But I'll turn it over to Mary just for a quick summary.
Madam Mayor, council members, primarily most of the disclosures that are required, you'll find in that paragraph below the actual ballot question. On the ballot question itself, let me see if I can get back to the slide. What it requires is that we demonstrate what the purpose for the bonds are. That's where the introductory prefatory language is. Where we are looking at issuing a series of bonds, we need to ensure that it directs that we can issue one or more series of bonds. We have to place the amount very specific in the ballot language. And then the authorization over the next period of 10 years is so that we have that ability to issue one or more series. We're not limited to a time frame in which those issuances can occur other than up to 10 years. And that is to match how we would like to improve or fund the improvements in the capital improvements plan for the first anticipated 10 years of construction projects. And so that's primarily what has to be in the proposed ballot language. You'll see in the bond ordinance itself, there's a whole disclosure section that is required by statute where we talk about what the anticipated interest rate is, what the principal is going to be, the total amount for those 2 things together, and some other required language in terms of its impact, or in this case, lack thereof, on property taxes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you, Steve.
Council President.
Thank you. Steve, my question has to do with the graph that you showed us about potential rates going forward, recognizing that those could well be different than what is exactly shown on the screen. These are projections. However, if you look at this, that because they're cumulative, that 53% in the first year on the bottom part of the graph, actually, if you showed this as dollar amounts, the dollar amount changes even going out on the bottom amount might be about equal to the top one. Is that correct? And then of course at the end, so in other words, whoever's on the system today would pay for it with quite a bit higher fees. And at 2027, 2028, new people who might move in later to the valley would pay less. And that if we do it the way that if people were to vote yes, everyone would pay a little bit more for the next 10 years, next 5 years, but then even those people who move in later would help pay for these improvements. Am I hearing that correctly?
Madam Mayor, Council President, that's generally correct. The upfront cost for cash only is certainly going to be higher for current residents. And in the near term, those higher rates will move forward. And so that's one of the reasons when we think about affordability for citizens, one of the reasons we're looking at that cash plus the bond is try to reduce that upfront rate increase and stretch those rate increases out over the 20-year life of the CIP, which we think, as you alluded to, would create that generational equity where we're spreading, allocating those costs, we think more fairly to folks that are on the system later and getting the benefits of a new recycled water program, for example. So that's correct.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Steve, I'm sorry I missed the first part of your presentation, but in case you've already covered this. So as you know, we're going to be doing our city council elections by district for the first time. And I know there's a little bit of confusion about who gets to participate. And can you explain how this fits into that new system?
Madam Mayor, I will again look to legal staff. I don't want to step into that one with just not really understanding exactly how it's going to work. So maybe I'll defer to legal and maybe we might have to get back to you on that one.
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem, in terms of districting for election of council members, that will not have a great effect on who gets to vote in this particular electorate. This will be open to any Boise City residents that have met the other qualifications to be registered as a voter as required by law, with one exception, which is the West Boise Sewer District. That jurisdiction is excluded from the Boise electorate that can vote on this sewer bond, these revenue bonds, particularly because that authority for the West Boise Sewer District is governed by a different set of statutes. They have their own authority to issue bonds, to make assessments, and to set the rates for their customers. And so our jurisdiction as it relates to sewer by the city does not extend to that over any authority over the West Boise Sewer District.
Madam Mayor, just a quick follow-up. So for those folks who would not be voting for a council member this year, will that be part of the education that you're going to do to let folks know that they can still participate in this vote?
It can certainly be something we add to the educational materials to make sure that they're aware they have the ability to vote.
Thank you, Mayor.
Madam Mayor,
Go ahead.
two quick questions. One is, do you know, this might be for legal as well, sorry, will the city encounter additional costs because it's our bond? Do we have to put in some money to the county to pay for the election process? And then also, in terms of the projects themselves, regardless we're going to do them, do you foresee any challenges getting the workforce we need to do the projects? Thanks.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, I'll just take the first part of that question. Generally speaking, we will issue these bonds to also cover the cost of issuance. As to whether that extends to election costs, that maybe have to be a question that we get back to council on. But in terms of these bonds themselves, it does not obligate the city to repay any of the debt on the issuance of the bonds themselves.
And Madam Mayor, Councilmember, on the construction market, thank you for the question. We've been tracking it pretty closely and trying to get a sense for how to navigate some of the challenges that are coming in the construction market. An example would be at the airport, we've been working with Rebecca Hupp on how to maybe package some of their projects to take advantage or address some of the concerns that might be happening in the construction market. So for example, we suggested that we package more projects to make it a larger project so economies of scale can draw in more interest from other contractors. That might be a technique we use moving forward. We're actively talking to contractors in the area, and it might be that the size of our program might start to draw in some of more national level firms. That wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing just because we know there's other entities, St. Luke's, St. Al's, Amazon, other large construction projects, City of Meridian's wastewater treatment system. So it will be something we monitor very closely, and we're trying to develop some solutions for.
All right, that looks like it, Steve. Thanks. So as Steve said, the first reading of the ordinance is tonight. That'll be on the council agenda.
And Madam Mayor, I just want to quickly say, just thank the team. There's a bunch of folks in the audience that are here today that have been working really hard to pull all this information together. Heather Buchanan and her team, Haley Faulkner, our consultant team, Eric Heringer from Piper Sandler, Brown and Caldwell's here. Just the team has been working extremely hard, and I just want to recognize them for that.
Thank you.
And Mary, of course. Thank
Great.
you.
Have a great evening. Thank you, everybody. Next up, we have Bree and Deanna for the Pathways Plan.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm Deanna Dupuy, Comprehensive Planner, and I'm joined by Bree Brush, Mayor's Transportation Advisor. And we're happy to be here to present an update on the Boise's Pathway Plan. Just checking back in, the Boise Pathways Plan is a long-range plan to expand the system of pathways across our full city. We'll be presenting a draft network and a set of policy and design recommendations to help with implementation. As a reminder, we were here in May and we last discussed existing conditions, some peer cities research, our plan goals, and a summary of our spring community engagement. Today, we'll be presenting our draft plan, as I mentioned. We'll cover our prioritization process, summarize our summer community engagement, and then move into some next steps with implementation recommendations. So as I said, we built off of our existing conditions research and our spring community engagement to develop a draft network of our proposed pathway system shown here on this map. And we also have an interactive map online that we can share. This pathway system proposes over 200 miles of pathways across the city, and about 85% of our Boise residents would now be within a 10-minute walk from the proposed pathway network. That's an increase from the current 10% of Boise residents. Recognizing now that we have 200 miles of pathways that we're going to begin implementing, we really wanted to make sure that we had a prioritization process that worked. And we decided to take a two-prong approach to prioritization. First, we looked at our goal-oriented criteria, analyzing each pathway segment and their ability to help us meet our goals. And then we also are working on a project feasibility prioritization, recognizing that there are some quick wins that we can move forward on, opportunities for impact or projects that have high visibility, as well as weighing public and stakeholder support as we move through that feasibility analysis. Today, I'll be covering that goal-oriented analysis, which we really looked at more data-driven and its ability to help us advance goals. So as we built off of that community engagement in the previous phase, we asked and we looked at some background research to identify goals, background research including our transportation action plan. We identified that we really wanted our pathway system to help make useful connections and then to promote equity, access, and choice. So we analyzed each segment and then really looked at it. Does this pathway connect to daily needs such as a grocery store? Does this pathway connect to schools, recreation destinations? And if the pathway did, we were able to just score it and give it a score for yes or no. Similarly, we looked under that bucket of promote equity, access, and choice, and we analyzed, is this pathway in an area that currently does not have pathway access, or if it's in an area, as our equity analysis indicated, of having a greater need for pathways. And we were able to give each of those a score. And then we tallied that all together and we're able to rank each pathway segment in its ability of high priority to advance goals and to lower priority in that sense. And so with that, we were able to identify kind of what we're calling our top 3 off-street priority projects. And these came up as they have high likelihood to advance those goals. So you'll see our railway trail from Milwaukee to Opal. So it connects from the Central Bench to the Regional Activity Center in Boise Town Square Mall. We also see that the farmers lateral pathway on the central bench came as a high priority because of its equity impacts and its ability to connect to learning. There's several schools along that stretch. And then we saw the Thurman Drain, which is up off of Chinden that connects to the City of Eagles Greenbelt because of its ability to make that connection to a regionally significant pathway. So those came as high of helping us to advance to meet that goal. But we also recognize that we want this pathway system to work generally and that we can look completely off street, but we can also look within our roadway corridors to make connections that way, really thinking, hey, can we still provide a completely separated experience for our residents, thinking of the success of the Federal Way bikeway. So this is imagining arterials being re-envisioned to be more similar to Federal Way. And we saw that came high from our data analysis, Curtis Veterans Parkway, and we heard this a lot from our community, a need to connect from West Boise down the hill to the river. Similarly, this alignment executive emerald is very similar to alignment along the railway trail, but that desire to connect from the central bench to the regional activity center at the mall. And then, what we kind of have always been working towards is improving biking and walking along State Street as a high priority because it has so many business and commercial destinations. So now I'll turn it over to Bree to talk a bit more about our summer community outreach.
Thanks, Deanna. The goal of phase 2 of our outreach was to share our draft network map with the public and really hear from them what their priorities are. In the maps Deanna went through with you just now, those were where the segments landed based on our goal criteria. So this was really listening to the public and hearing where they thought the priorities should be. And we were able to host 6 outreach events in the month of July alone. We added a couple more this time so that we can engage with residents in areas that didn't have a ton of participation before. So we tried to go across the city. We went to a park on the west bench, compost market, Shankaran market on the central bench. We went to an event downtown and we did a pop-up at Quinn's Pond on a Saturday. And we really owe a lot of that staffing to our community engagement interns. They helped us get the additional staffing support we needed to be able to attend all of these. And from that process, here are a few that rose to the top. You'll see we have, just like Deanna broke out before, some off-street corridors and then some roadway corridors. And bolded and underlined, number 1 in letter A, are corridors that both were high priority based on our goals and high priority based on the resident feedback. So that was really telling to us and something that we can use for feasibility for all of these to kind of figure out what public support might look like for implementation of these. And then the little numbers next to all of these segments are how many times the segment was liked or voted on by residents, because that's what the survey allowed you to do. One of the final deliverables we expect to get from our consultant are these concept sheets. These are deep dives into 2 or 3 pathway segments of our choice to understand the scope and potential implementation of these specific areas. So we're trying to be really strategic about which ones we select, selecting segments that connect to activity centers, that could be potential quick wins, that might be a good example of an off-street connecting to an on-street, and then maybe another one that could connect to the green belt. So we're trying to find segments that check a lot of these boxes. A couple implementation recommendations you can expect to see from the plan. One that sticks out here is dedication for new development, so that when a new development comes through or a parcel is rezoned, if it intersects with the pathway plan, we can get those pathways built through that process. We've seen a lot of other cities using this, and having the plan makes it so we can identify these areas and establish design guidelines, because that's another thing you'll see in the plan when it comes forward for adoption. We also have some programmatic support recommendations. So how can we make the Pathways program successful with maintenance, having volunteer maintenance options. We had a lot of research we saw from other cities about how people supported their local pathways. And then continuing the outreach with the irrigation districts throughout this whole process. Deanna and I, joined by staff in Public Works, have met with, I think, 5 of our local irrigation district and water providers at every checkpoint to keep the communication open and hear from them what their needs might be and how we could find projects that facilitate mutually beneficial outcomes. And one of the recommendations from the plan will be to update our agreements with these districts because we have sort of antiquated agreements that we haven't reviewed in a while. So, and another one on here is tracking the issuance and requirements of easements. Kind of going to the first thing I said, making sure we're securing these easements when we have the opportunity, not trying to go backwards and get them after we've lost that opportunity. Next steps, we'll finalize a network, assess the feasibility of all of the different pathway segments identified, get those concept sheets back, review and release the plan draft, including those design guidelines I mentioned, and then begin process to adopt the plan in Blueprint Boise, which I imagine will be the next time you see us here. So we are happy to stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much for all of your hard work. I know that those public outreach events were very well received by members of the community. I heard great feedback. I have a question about, I know you mentioned the irrigation districts and that ongoing communication to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page going forward. What does that look like with the railroads? Because I know that the kind of rail to trails is a very national initiative. And so I'm curious, like, are they receptive to that? Is it something that's going to require kind of ongoing negotiation? What does that look like?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Whittings, that is a segment that we haven't quite gotten as deep with as we have the irrigation districts. There have been some initial studies through Compass for sections of rail to trail in Meridian, and they have a working group on that. So outside of what we could learn on that, we really want to understand how far back these easements are from the railroad and get a better understanding of that, what that looks like, but then also use what the rail to trail working group at Compass learns for the Meridian segments.
Great, that sounds good. And I have one more question, if that's all right. I know that several years ago, when I was pretty new to council, we had talked to ACHD as they were redesigning and rebuilding some of the intersections along State Street. And I remember the mayor at that time, well, this mayor back then at that time had proposed that they go to a multi-use pathway scenario at those intersections. And so now it looks like we're saying we do want multi-use pathways along State Street, which is what we've been saying all along. What does that look like with ACHD on coordinating?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Whittings, part of our outreach to other entities was including ACHD, determining which of their bikeways that are currently designated as level 2 or maybe a lower level of protection or width from the roadway to up them to level 3. So we could get that multi-use path standard. So we went through all of those arterials with them and on the slides, the roadway corridors that we have here, we talked about all of these with ACHD, and it's all depending on timing, right? Or if the low feasibility is because it's not a project that's planned for 15 years down the road. That's why, but we did look through all of these with them and try to identify which ones could be up to that level 3 standard.
Great.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Whittings, and just to speak specifically about State Street, I think that really is the direction we're moving on. The 2019 State Street TOD guidebook also calls for a multi-use path. And so we're working to have that, high level and a high standard along State Street. And I think that investment is something the planning staff is moving towards.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that update.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a little addition to that last conversation. I think largely as a result of the city of Boise's conversation on State Street, ACHD did adopt a policy that allows side paths on arterials. They also were successful in getting legislation that allows them more flexibility in doing side paths with fuel tax money along roadways. So I think we're well set up now, much better than we were when State Street was first being planned. So I'm hopeful going forward that they are supportive. They've got legislation that allows them to, and it looks like we can plan that into the future improvements.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
just a quick comment, really, not very often is bicycle infrastructure historically been planned with an equity lens, which is what is so exciting about this plan. And I really appreciate all of the extra work from the planning team and you all in making this happen. And also, I guess, a few other folks here as well. I mean, with the mayor's initiative of Connection for Everyone, with Councilmember Sanchez's push for equity, with our Parks Director Doug's push for making sure that everybody has access to a park within their neighborhood, we were able to translate a lot of that stuff into bicycle infrastructure that we really haven't seen in our city historically. And it's so exciting. And when you look at potentially 84 to 85%, that sort of vision of a future, it's really pretty remarkable. And it's something that we don't really see in other cities. So job well done. And I appreciate the precedent that was set by a lot of our other council members, staff, the mayor as well. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much for this presentation. Those numbers are exciting. Unlike my colleagues who are very comfortable on bicycles, I am not one of those people who is yet comfortable. And so that's part of what excites me about this, is I think folks who tend to ride bikes, they either really enjoy it and it's something they feel comfortable doing, or they have to. They have no other choice. And so what excites me is the idea is that I'm part of that middle group that would like to be engaged in the community in that way. And this creates a safe option for those of us to become more committed to that alternative transportation lifestyle. So thank you so much for this presentation. I love the numbers, like, wow, 85%, that's so powerful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It looks like that's it for comments right now. Appreciate the work. Look forward to seeing all this come to fruition. And next up, Courtney Washburn, Chief of Staff, is going to give an update on McGurdio. Thanks to those of you who are in the audience for coming today. It was about a month ago before council recessed. Oh, I didn't even mark that we're back from recess after a couple of weeks of being off. And so we had asked, council had asked Courtney to come back with some updates. I just want to kick this off by reminding folks that we brought this up when it came to a land exchange. And the reason that the city was doing due diligence on the land exchange was because we needed to see, we owed it to our residents to see if it made sense from a penciling financial perspective. As I said before, it was different than auctioning because it gave us a tool and teeth to ensure affordability in homes that are being built. And we need homes here in our community. We also need open space and parks. And we said we would do due diligence. We did that and it did not pencil for residents. And so we pulled that. And because we pulled it, I pulled the request for annexation as well in advance of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And I did that because I wanted there to be clarity for the community, clarity for the commission. And frankly, I wanted the school district to be able to discuss the merits of the application to annex for the land that they had sold. And that meeting wasn't our best day. And I know that we can do better. I apologize for that. Timing wise, I wish that it could have been set up in a way that was more clear for the commission, and that the commission did not have to have the experience that they had that evening. That was definitely not our intent. I want to be clear before Courtney gives an update primarily on the FAA piece that I have no intention of proposing to council that we move forward with annexation on this property. and we have other priorities that we're in the midst of. We did the due diligence that we said upfront that we would do, and that didn't pan out. We pulled it from annexation. We have no intention of annexing the Magurio property at this time. So with that, I'll ask Courtney to provide us with where we're at on some other issues.
Madam Mayor, members of the council. Again, I'm Courtney Washburn. I'm the Chief of Staff. I just have some brief updates to make sure that it's on the official record of the work session where things are in this process. So as the mayor mentioned, the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously recommended the approval to annex the airport properties and all the school district properties. That did not include the Magurio parcel. Also, in recommending approval, the commission suggested that representatives of the school district and airport attend your council hearing and that the agenda no longer reference the park. The reason for that confusion is that the meeting was noticed before the park was withdrawn from the record. Also, the removal of restricted covenants in the surplus property previously considered for this parcel will not move forward. And then lastly, the Boise Airport has retained outside counsel to take a holistic look at what can and can't be done with this property in regards to the FAA and how much the airport would need to be compensated for anything to move forward on this property. And we expect that report to be brought to you in the next month or so. And so with that, there are no other actions associated with this parcel that I'm aware of. So I'll stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Courtney, I know that it feels like, to me at least, this is only the beginning of the conversation that we're going to continue to have around annexation more generally in the Southwest Ada County Alliance. What do you think the timeline looks like to kind of move that conversation forward?
Madam Mayor, council member, I think what we'd like to do is next week at work session, we're taking a deep dive into the housing needs associated with the city. And part of that conversation will involve pieces that the property that the city owns that might be suitable for housing, considerations to try to meet this community need. And of course, that is the community's number one concern right now. So once we do that, we will assess where we are after that conversation. But I don't think anything will move forward in regards to this before an extensive community conversation is held, and we'll bring those plans before you before launching anything.
Thank you so much.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Courtney, for the update, and to you, Madam Mayor, as well. My question has to do with the park itself, and I don't know. I know that we are not prepared to have an answer today, but I know there's still a large expectation in the community that there's going to be a very large park in this part of the community. And as I understand our finances, and I understand the property tax that we are collecting in this region and the impact fees that we are collecting in this region, there just simply isn't enough to finance the large scale park that was originally part of what was being talked about on this parcel. And I just wonder how we're going to approach the conversation about if we still are going to have a park here, what should it look like? How big should it be? Those kinds of things. So the housing is one piece, but the parcel still, I think, needs to have the conversation about the park.
Madam Mayor, Council President, I would agree. I was remiss in not including the park in the ongoing conversations we intend to have with the neighborhood. But I do believe your characterization is correct. The city does not have the resources to address the issue anytime soon.
Thank you.
Nope. All right. Thank you, Courtney, for the update. Appreciate it.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, you're
I'm
back.
up next.
Yeah. Okay. 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 So welcome back, Courtney. Now Courtney is going to provide us with a quick update on the Shelter Better Task Force. I asked Courtney to come in and do this because I think we're at about the midway point at this moment. And if you'll all remember, I called together this task force to review the best practices with regard to shelter in our community at the time that we asked Interfaith to pause their application, because we want to make sure that as we move through this work, both as a council in decision-making and a community, and recognizing that there's a very important need that must be met in addition to meeting our goals of long-term goals of permanent supportive housing, that we have a committee of community leaders and experts come together, look at how we can do this better. And so Council President Clegg sits on that committee, and Courtney is as a non-voting member, and then Courtney is a non-voting member and chairing that committee. So she's here today to give you an update, a sense of the conversations so far, and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just wanted to, well, I'll wait for that to come up. So just a reminder of the charge of this task force is to produce an emergency shelter site recommendation for the relocation of Interfaith Sanctuary. Under the mayor's guidance, we were given 8 weeks for this task. So when I go over this, know that we are about in the middle, and I will come back to you with the formal recommendations of this task force. So just a reminder, the members of this task force include the following folks. The task force is comprised of 19 members, 17 are voting. It has broad representation from both faith leaders, neighborhood organizations, and those that work the day-to-day in the space, supporting those experiencing homelessness. I'll just give you a minute to check it out. We asked these folks to participate for 8 weeks in the summer in the middle of a health pandemic. So I say that because everyone has done their homework, participated earnestly. We worked around the scheduling challenges, and I just want to express my appreciation for the folks on this committee to carve out a piece of their summer with the other considerations to help us tackle this challenging issue. So the basis for the task force and the forthcoming recommendations are based on feasibility criteria. The land needs to be available to site a shelter, and you'll see some of the details on the slide. It also needs to be driven by a timeline. The proposed location needs to be available to develop or redevelop in a timely manner. Also needs to be a right size investment. We need to ensure that the cost of the proposed projects is part of a larger strategy in ensuring people can get into homes and out of overnight shelter. Also, proximity to service. The proposed location needs to be in close proximity or be along transit routes so that it easily connects to the services people need. The site development needs to accommodate the needs of a proposed shelter in terms of total bed, but it also needs to comply with our code compliance and zoning restrictions or lack of zoning restrictions. And then the shelter design must be manageable for Interfaith Sanctuary to sustain operations and in line with their business plan. So these criteria are what we're using to evaluate both shelter recommendations and a proposed location for the site.
And Courtney, just to be clear with everyone, when you say what we're using, you mean the committee. The committee is using those criteria.
Correct.
Madam Mayor, I just have a question before we move on. On a little bit larger, more strategic level, was it discussed by the committee whether a large congregate shelter is the best way to do shelter, or whether there are other models for sheltering that might actually work better for the city?
Councilmember, we are in the middle of that conversation. Interfaith Sanctuary gave their presentation today must be Tuesday, if I'm standing in front of you, yesterday, and laid out why they think multiple locations is challenging for their business model, but that is still an ongoing conversation with the task force.
Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Courtney. So I have a question about the task force and interfaith sanctuary. So is this work specific to this entity, or are we looking at a larger grouping of houseless serving agencies, or just interfaith?
Thank you for that question. While the task force is focused on interfaith sanctuary, the presentations and information provided have been from multiple partners throughout the community. And I think towards the end of my slides, there's a list of them. Also, you'll see at the end of the presentation, because we couldn't have a task force that size was unmanageable, meaning we couldn't have everyone on this task force to be able to operate efficiently. We do have a process for interviews for critical community partners. I believe we've extended 30 invitations, and that information is coming back. Those responses will be provided to you along with the recommendations at the end of the task force. So what we have covered so far, and again, to the mayor's point, this "we" is me on behalf of the task force, not the city. So in week 1, we got a better understanding of the charge of the task force and setting expectations. Week 2, it was shelter with larger homelessness system response. This is not about one shelter at one point in time, but the decisions we make individually have a bigger impact on the part of the community we're trying to support. And then in week 3, we got a better understanding of the role of emergency shelter in the overall system. In week 4, a shelter analysis was presented to get a better understanding of how you target the right number of beds for the population we're trying to serve, and what those shifts looks like when it comes down to emergency shelter versus entry into homes. And then, as I mentioned yesterday, Interfaith Sanctuary presented their current operations and plans for the facility that were largely based in the need for expansion to be able to address a growing community. And then where we're headed, tomorrow evening, I will spend with the neighborhood members of the task force to go through their concerns, both about siting a shelter anywhere in the city and those concerns specific to the proposed State Street site. And they will bring those concerns forward at our meeting in week 6, which is this upcoming Monday. And we will also do a potential site review for other options that Interfaith might want to explore. And those will be cross-referenced with the feasibility criteria I mentioned earlier. And then in week 7, we do a workshop with all the information we have and start preparing recommendations. And then at the final meeting, we will take all the components for final recommendations that I will provide to you after that meeting. I was right, there is a slide. So who we've worked with, the list on the left are all the folks who are providing expertise to the task force. And then on the right side are the entities we have interviewed so far. And as I mentioned, we have a total of 30. The list of folks we have interviewed has been a collection of either organizations that have reached out to us wanting to provide feedback, or members of the task force recommending critical partners whose opinions should be taken into consideration.
Madam Mayor, thank you, Madam Mayor. Is there, Courtney, is there, and Mayor, is there a possibility for, I know we've got the 8-week charge, but is there a possibility of this grouping being permanent, or something that would be ongoing in some form or fashion?
I'm not going to say yes, because I promised them 8 weeks, right? So just in case any of them are listening, I've asked you for 8 weeks. I really appreciate the service you're providing. We are focused on this right now, but there's more to come, right? So the next week in our council work session, we'll be talking about housing needs. Permanent supportive housing needs will function into that. There'll be different times when we need to bring community leaders and collaborative partners together to actuate a lot of the goals that we have as a community. So this task force charged with ensuring that any proposal for shelter, meets the need in the most forward-thinking, appropriate ways for our community. But then I expect that there will also be recommendations on what we as a city need to do to bring people together to address family homelessness, permanent supportive housing, et cetera.
And then lastly, just so everyone's aware, the city staff has done a nice job of putting all of this information in one spot. So you can watch the meetings, they've been recorded. You can read the pieces of information the task force has been reading. And then if you ever want to join an upcoming meeting virtually, this is where you would go to register on a Zoom link. And so you're welcome to any and all of the information. So I encourage you to make note of this webpage for follow-up. And with that, Madam Mayor, I just want to give the council president the opportunity to add anything, given that she serves on the task force.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just add a few things. I think the task force has been really helpful to date, because I think it's been a place where people can speak freely and honestly about some really tough issues. And at least so far I've seen that. And I applaud, all the members of the task force for bringing to it, not dug in ideas about what we were going to do, but bringing to it their commitment to look at all the information that the staff has gathered and that we've identified and brought forward, and then talking about all of that in a very open way to try and come up with solutions. I would say that I think Courtney is correct that one of the things that's been identified is there is a need in this community for supportive housing for families, for more housing for families, whether they need supports or not, that are in that very low income range, the 30% AMI and below. And in addition, has identified that part of the pressure that Interfaith Sanctuary is feeling has to do with both the needs of families in this community that aren't being met any other way, and the needs, frankly, of some of our most vulnerable community members who may be medically fragile, or who otherwise just need a safe place to work through whatever the challenges they're facing are, so that they can get to a point where they're able to move forward. And so in addition to shelter, as I'm serving on this committee, it's abundantly clear to me that all of your support for using some of the money in our capital fund to address some of those highest need community members is the right thing to do. I know that we've moved slowly on it. We don't have an official proposal yet about how to do that, but I would say that coming out of this, I expect that we'll have a much deeper understanding of what the needs are that we could address that would change the direction of what needs need to be addressed at the shelter. And so hopefully the two of those can coincide at some point. But most importantly, just everyone on the task force has been really responsive, really participatory. And I just want to thank all of them for their work.
Madam Mayor. Yeah. First, I really appreciate what Council President Clegg just brought up the need for real permanent solutions in conjunction with some temporary housing as well. My question, I guess, is more of a matter of logistics in the task force. And what I'm trying to understand is that the ideal situation would be that the task force would come up with a recommendation and Interfaith Sanctuary would agree with that recommendation and they would move forward with it. I guess my question is, since Interfaith Sanctuary is its own organization, can the task force make a recommendation and then Interfaith does have the ability to do what they think is best for them, not necessarily what the task force comes up with? Again, hopefully those coincide, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
Madam Mayor, council member, that is correct, but I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that a good faith effort to satisfy all interested parties is well underway. So I'm optimistic we can get something that works for everyone. But at the end of the day, you are correct. It is a separate entity and has its own choices to make in regards to its property. The next step, if nothing happened to change the course, would be the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Great. Madam Mayor, just follow up. I'm going to try to reword that so that it sounds a little bit better. Interfaith Sanctuary is voluntarily participating in this effort. They aren't forced to do it. They could have had the ability to continue to move forward, but they're choosing to operate within this task force. And hopefully that recommendation provides a path forward.
Correct, council member. And I will say, yesterday at the task force meeting, the senior staff of Interfaith were able to make presentations to the task force. And the stories are really compelling. Their dedication to serving this community is just remarkable. So I encourage you to check that out. It was recorded, but yes, this system and task force is based on a good faith effort by all parties.
And I really want to reiterate that when, I asked Interfaith to pause their application, they had a choice at that moment to move forward and go to Planning and Zoning Commission or to pause and participate in this. And they were willing to pause, which was very important. And then also to fully in good faith participate in this task force that includes folks from Our Path Home who they work with, folks from the neighborhoods who had deep concerns, and experts from throughout the community. So I want that to be clear. We are optimistic, but we knew that we needed to create a forum where an organization that provides a needed and necessary service in this community could hear from others, could talk with others, and together our community could come up with a Boise solution and recommendation. And then, of course, regardless, it comes to council, and it is my sincerest hope that recommendation will provide a path forward for all of you and for Planning and Zoning Commission. But there is that process that has to go underway once the task force is completed. And then Interfaith looks at the recommendations and decides what to do next with their application.
I think you put that much better than I did.
Madam Mayor, just a quick question. I'm sorry, I don't know if I missed it on the list of people. Is BPD part of this task force?
Council Pro Tem Sanchez, BPD has presented information in regards to their focus was on if the shelter were to move from its current location, which to be clear, it is moving from its current location. What would that do to impact the role of policing in a different location from a shelter? And they provided a much more detailed presentation than I'll characterize. But at the end of the day, they said they would go where the need was, and they are adaptable to moving services if they're needed with a different location.
Okay, just a quick follow-up, Madam Mayor. What about parking enforcement? And the reason I'm asking about that is because I have been contacted by people who work with the medically fragile, where they're preparing folks to live in their car. And I'm just wondering what our parking enforcement is encountering, especially now that we have the updated parking ordinance in place.
Courtney, is that something that you could bring back?
Yeah.
Or a memo to council? Because that's not something that is the subject of this task force. But if I remember correctly, council did ask for an update 6 months in or so when the parking ordinance, do you remember what it was? So, but of course you don't have to wait for 6 months. Courtney can get some information on that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What the individual who contacted me with St. Al's said they were contacting upwards of 20 churches trying to find access to parking lots, and they're not getting a good reception because of insurance issues. So just wanted to make folks aware of that.
All right, Courtney, it looks like there's nothing else. Thank you. So next up, we do have an executive session. Yes.
I move to go into executive session to discuss land acquisition and records exempt from public disclosure pursuant to Idaho Code Section 74-206, subsections 1C and 1D.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajan,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson. All in favor, motion carries.
And Council President, do you have, we'll all be in the conference room, but do you have, you're good? Do you have a link? Okay, great.
Yeah.
See you on the other side.